Today we're going to be discussing the requirements needed for personal protective equipment required to enter the buffer room to perform sterile compounding. We're going to be discussing both for 797 and 800 precautions. So upon entering the ante room, I'm going to first of all make sure before entering I'm not going to have any rings or jewelry on prior to entering. Upon entering, I have not crossed the line of demarcation yet, so the first thing I'm going to do is put on some of my PPE. So what we need to do is put on our hair cover. As we put our hair cover on, we want to put it on so that it's covering all our hair, followed by a mask. And then we're going to put on 2 pairs of shoe covers. To do that, we're going to sit on the bench, still with our feet across the non-clean side of the line of demarcation. From there, we're going to simply put 1 shoe cover on at a time, trying our best to keep our fingers on the inside of the shoe covering, not to contaminate with our dirty hands the outside. As I put 1 on, I'm going to put that foot across the line of demarcation into the clean zone. I'm going to do the same process with the other foot. Again, putting it across to the clean side. Now I've crossed over into the clean side and I have both my shoe covers on. From there, I'll walk around the bench and perform hand hygiene. So to perform hand hygiene, there's a couple essential rules. You need to wash your hands as well as scrub your fingernails under your fingernails for at least 30 seconds. So as a general rule of thumb, typically you would have a clock up on here and you would just simply look for that 30 seconds as you're doing your hand hygiene. So it's important as you're washing your hands to use soap, but you're not just washing your hands, you're also scrubbing up your arms as well, making sure that you get to your elbows. You'll follow that after your 30 seconds with washing all the way up. Make sure you remove all the suds, and again, you're cleaning in between your fingernails, which obviously we aren't doing at this moment. After you finish washing, you want to use a lint-free paper towel or rag, something that's not going to shed, to dry your hands. After finished washing my hands, I will perform additional hand hygiene by using sterile alcohol. I will let this dry by air prior to donning gloves. From there, we are able to begin putting our gloves on. So for the purposes of today, this is one of the differences that we need to discuss between hazardous drug compounding and regular drug compounding, or just a sterile product. So they make different types of gloves. So if you look here, these are both sterile gloves, but the difference is one has been tested by the American standard for testing of materials. So this meets what's called chemo-qualified gloves, meaning that it withstands tested chemotherapy to the glove, so it does not penetrate through. Now, a lot of these gloves will have different recommendations and times you need to change it. Our general rule with chemo gloves is every 30 minutes while you're wearing it, you need to change your chemo gloves. If you're in the hood doing multiple compounding, every time you either have a penetration or some type of rip is another time that you would want to also change the gloves. So we're going to use our non-hazardous chemotherapy gloves to finish our garbing, but before we do that, we want to put on our gown. So this is another difference between hazardous compounding and non-hazardous compounding, is they make different types of gowns. One being permeable, where you can see it's a little bit looser. If you had some type of liquid go on it, there's potential for that to go through the gown. So there's also chemo gowns, which are made of plastic material, making it less penetratable from chemotherapy. So we're going to put on the chemo gown. So as you put your gown on, you're still trying to maintain as little contact to the outside of the gown as possible in order to keep everything sterile. You do want to tie it around the back. as well as connect at the top. From there, we can begin to put our gloves on. Now again, one of the main differences between compounding a hazardous medication and a non-hazardous medication is the number of gloves required. For non-hazardous compounding, you would simply need one pair of sterile gloves, whereas compounding a hazardous medication, that's going to require 2 sets of chemotherapy certified gloves. So that's a major difference that needs to be remembered. Again, since I put on my chemo gown, I'm going to be performing chemotherapy glove donning at this point. So to put on any sterile glove, there's a couple of key considerations. One, it's sterile, so you want to, again, although you've already performed your hand hygiene, it's important to make sure that you minimize contact with the actual glove. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to move some of this out of the way so you have a better view. So you can see here, as I open the chemotherapy glove, we have 2 gloves. The cuff is turned inside out on both of them, so you want to grab that inside of the cuff because you're going to be placing your hand in there. So as I put on the glove, I can begin to pull it forward. Now I'm going to show you again differences in how the gloves are put on. So now we're going to be specifically talking about non-hazardous chemotherapy gloving. So make sure that your cuff of your gown is tucked on the inside so that you have a completely covered hand. And we'll do the same thing with the other glove. So this one now you have a sterile hand, so you're able to kind of utilize that to help yourself put on the other glove. So now at this point, I would be ready to enter the buffer room or the clean room. The final step before doing so would be to perform alcoholing of the hands. So this is again an alcohol-based product, and I'm just simply making sure if I did have any contact with the gloves that I'm again sterilizing the gloves with alcohol. So for hazardous chemotherapy gloving, again, we need 2 sets of chemo gloves. So the difference is I want to tuck the first set underneath the gown. Followed by putting on the second set of gloves with that set covering the sleeve of the gown. So again, I still want to maintain the sterile integrity of the glove as I put on the second pair. So I'm going to utilize the same process by holding the inner cuff that's already been folded over and simply placing it over the first glove and over the sleeve of the gown. Trying to make sure that it's tucked completely inside. Again, with the second glove, I'm going to place it over the first glove as well as the sleeve of the gown on the other hand. And finally, again, we're performing our final hand hygiene before entering the buffer room of alcoholing the hands. So now we're ready to enter the buffer room.